Imagine a world where modern humans were not alone. The Earth was once home to several different human species, each fighting for survival. Yet today only one remains. What happened to the others? Was it climate, disease, war, or something far more surprising? In this video we'll uncover the incredible story of how our ancestors became the last human standing, and why history could have taken a completely different path. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey into humanity's greatest mysteries. Now let's travel back to the beginning. The wind carries fine dust across an empty valley where no voices remain. A shallow cave opens into the hillside, its entrance partly hidden by grass and broken stone. Inside, the ash of ancient fires lies buried beneath thousands of years of sediment. A discarded stone scraper rests only a few steps away from the bones of a child. The people who once gathered here vanish so completely that even their names disappear before names themselves exist. Yet they are not animals in the ordinary sense, nor are they quite like the people walking through modern cities today. They belong to another kind of human. For a very long time they share the planet with others, just like them, each carrying different faces, different bodies, different histories, and different ways of surviving an unpredictable world. That forgotten reality is perhaps the greatest surprise uncovered by modern archaeology and genetics. Earth is not always the home of a single humanity. Instead, it is populated by an entire family of human species. Some are tall and powerfully built. Others are small enough to stand little higher than a modern child. Some thrive in frozen landscapes beneath towering glaciers. Others survive in tropical forests or isolated islands, where evolution quietly follows its own path. Across hundreds of thousands of years, several kinds of humans walk beneath the same sun. Today, that diversity has almost completely vanished. Every person alive belongs to a single surviving species, Homo sapiens. Everyone else is gone. Before going deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. It is tempting to imagine that the story unfolds like a simple competition, with one superior species inevitably replacing weaker rivals. The evidence tells a far more complicated tale. Survival rarely belongs to the strongest alone. History, whether ancient or modern, is filled with populations that flourish for thousands of years before disappearing because circumstances change faster than adaptation can follow. The same principle shapes the deep human past. The story begins long before civilization, before farming, before cities, before writing, and even before language reaches anything resembling its modern complexity. It begins in Africa, where changing climates repeatedly transform forests into grasslands and back again. Lakes expand during wet periods and shrink into cracked basins during long droughts. Rivers alter their courses. Entire ecosystems appear and disappear across generations. Every environmental shift presents new opportunities but also new dangers. Within this unstable landscape, early members of the human family gradually separate from older ape ancestors. Walking upright frees the hands. Dexterous fingers manipulate stones with increasing precision. Larger brains slowly evolve, although not in a steady upward march. Evolution rarely follows a straight path. Different populations acquire different strengths while adapting to different environments. Some become efficient endurance walkers across open plains. Others specialize in exploiting woodland habitats. Natural selection constantly experiments producing branches rather than a single line. The human family tree therefore resembles a tangled bush far more than a ladder. Species appear, overlap, sometimes interbreed, and often disappear. Many leave behind only scattered fossils discovered decades or even centuries apart. A jawbone in one cave, a skull fragment beside an ancient river, a handful of teeth emerging from limestone after heavy rain. Each discovery slightly alters the picture, reminding researchers that much of the record remains hidden beneath soil that has yet to be excavated. For much of scientific history, people assume that human evolution progresses neatly from primitive ancestors toward modern perfection. That image begins to collapse as more fossils emerge. Instead of replacing one another instantly, several human species coexist across enormous stretches of time. They occupy different regions but occasionally cross paths. They are not myths or failed experiments. They are successful humans in their own environments. Some possess brains as large as or even larger than those of modern humans. Others manufacture sophisticated stone tools. Many master the controlled use of fire. They hunt dangerous animals, care for injured companions, and adapt to climates that would challenge even well-equipped modern explorers. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that intelligence alone cannot explain why one lineage eventually remains while the others disappear. The scale of time involved is almost impossible to picture. Entire mountain ranges slowly erode while these different humans spread across continents. Coastlines advance and retreat as ice ages lock away vast quantities of water before releasing it again. Places that are islands today are once connected to mainland landscapes. Broad grasslands later drown beneath rising seas. Generations live and die without ever realizing that the world itself is constantly rearranging around them. Modern archaeology reconstructs these vanished worlds piece by piece. Tiny grains of ancient pollen reveal forgotten forests. Chemical signatures trapped inside cave formations preserve records of rainfall. Microscopic scratches on fossil teeth reveal changing diets. Burned animal bones indicate repeated occupation of campsites. Even fragments of ancient DNA extracted from sediment now identify people whose skeletons are never found. These remarkable advances allow researchers to glimpse populations that leave almost no visible trace, yet certainty remains rare. Scholars still debate the exact relationships among several early human groups. New discoveries sometimes overturn ideas that appear secure only a decade earlier. A cave explored with improved technology reveals unexpected occupation. Genetic evidence exposes hidden connections invisible in fossil anatomy. A single finger bone preserved in a Siberian cave eventually uncovers an entire population that science never knew existed before. Such discoveries remind us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this story is how ordinary these ancient humans probably seemed to one another. A child watches adults shape stone tools. Hunters return carrying meat after dangerous pursuits. Families gather around evening fires. Elderly individuals pass on practical knowledge accumulated across decades. The rhythms of daily existence, finding food, protecting children, avoiding predators, surviving harsh winters, bind all human species together despite their physical differences. From a distance of hundreds of thousands of years, however, another pattern quietly emerges. Some populations remain isolated for immense periods. Others begin expanding into unfamiliar territories. Climate shifts repeatedly force movement. Rivers become barriers or highways depending on the season. Deserts bloom during wetter centuries before becoming nearly impassable again. Every migration creates new encounters and new pressures. No one living through these events could possibly recognize their long-term significance. They are simply responding to immediate needs. Food grows scarce. Animals migrate elsewhere. Water sources fail. A neighboring valley appears more promising. Small decisions made by countless individuals accumulate across thousands of generations until entire continents gradually become inhabited by different human populations. If someone could stand above the earth during this distant age, the view would reveal no dominant civilization and no single human destiny. Instead, scattered communities occupy an enormous and changing world. Vast regions remain empty. Ice sheets cover northern lands. Dense forests conceal river valleys. Winds sweep across open grasslands where mammoths, giant deer, woolly rhinoceroses, and formidable predators roam. Among them move several kinds of humans, each believing perhaps that their way of life simply belongs to the natural order. None of them can know that only one branch of this remarkable family will survive to tell the story. The mystery is not merely why the others disappear. The deeper mystery is why anyone survives at all. The first members of the human family do not spread across the world as part of a grand plan. They move because landscapes change beneath their feet. Seasons become less predictable. Rivers shift course. Forests retreat before expanding grasslands only to reclaim them thousands of years later. Every generation inherits a slightly different world than the one before it. Over immense spans of time, these gradual environmental changes shape bodies' behaviors and eventually entirely new human species. The deepest roots of this story remain firmly planted in Africa. Here the fossil record is richer than anywhere else, preserving scattered glimpses of millions of years of evolution. No single skeleton tells the complete story, and many chapters remain missing, but together they reveal that humanity never emerges in a single dramatic moment. Instead, countless small evolutionary changes accumulate across populations living under different ecological pressures. Early upright walkers gradually become more efficient travelers. Hands capable of grasping branches become equally capable of striking one stone against another to produce sharp cutting edges. Teeth change as diets diversify. Brains slowly increase in size, although not always at the same pace or in the same direction. Evolution resembles a branching river more than a straight road. Some branches flourish briefly before ending. Others continue for astonishing lengths of time. Among these early travelers appears Homo erectus, one of the most successful human species ever to exist. Unlike many relatives whose fossil record remains confined to relatively small regions, Homo erectus spreads across enormous distances. Fossils attributed to this species or closely related populations appear from eastern Africa to western Asia, and eventually far into eastern Asia. Their success lasts for well over 1 million years, an achievement that far exceeds the entire history of modern civilization. What allows such an expansion remains partly uncertain. Scholars generally agree that Homo erectus possesses a body remarkably similar in overall proportions to modern humans. Long legs improve endurance walking across open landscapes. More efficient sweating helps regulate body temperature during extended movement under intense sunlight. These adaptations may seem ordinary today, but they represent a profound evolutionary advantage in environments where persistence often matters more than speed. Stone tools also become increasingly refined. Early toolmakers already understand how to strike flakes from stone cores, but later populations produce carefully shaped hand axes with remarkable symmetry. These tools are not random fragments. They require planning, practice, skill, and an understanding of how different rocks fracture. Some hand axes are so carefully crafted that archaeologists still debate whether certain examples also serve symbolic or social purposes beyond simple utility. Fire gradually becomes another transformative force. Exactly when humans first master controlled fire remains uncertain, because natural wildfires leave traces that can resemble deliberate use. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate many early sites. What survives in the archaeological record nevertheless suggests that by several 100,000 years ago, some human populations regularly control fire for warmth, protection, cooking, and perhaps even social gathering. Cooking changes more than meals. Softened food becomes easier to digest. Nutrients become more accessible. Dangerous bacteria are reduced. Evening hours, once limited by darkness, now extend around glowing embers. Fire also reshapes landscapes through controlled burning, encouraging new plant growth that attracts grazing animals. A simple campfire becomes an ecological tool capable of altering entire local environments. As thousands of generations past, different human populations become increasingly isolated from one another. Mountains, deserts, glaciers, and expanding seas separate groups for tens of thousands of years. Isolation allows evolution to proceed independently. Small genetic differences slowly accumulate until regional populations begin developing distinct anatomical characteristics. Some lineages remain in Africa, where environments continue changing in complex cycles. Others move northward into Western Eurasia, confronting colder climates, unlike anything their ancestors experience. Thick forests replace open savannas. Winters lengthen. Snow covers the ground for months. Large Ice Age mammals dominate unfamiliar ecosystems. Natural selection responds accordingly. Bodies become stockier in colder regions, helping conserve heat. Faces gradually change shape. Rib cages broaden. Limbs shorten slightly relative to overall body size. These differences emerge slowly over countless generations rather than appearing suddenly. Each adaptation reflects countless lives shaped by local conditions. Meanwhile, Africa continues producing remarkable diversity of its own. Far from being a static homeland left behind by migrating populations, it remains an active center of human evolution. Numerous groups occupy different ecological zones, from dense tropical forests to dry grasslands and coastal environments rich in marine resources. Gene flow between neighboring populations continues, while temporary isolation repeatedly creates new variation. This diversity proves enormously important later, although no one living at the time could possibly recognize its future significance. The climate itself behaves almost like another participant in the story. During glacial periods, vast ice sheets expand across northern Europe and North America. Sea levels fall dramatically as enormous volumes of water become trapped within continental glaciers. Land bridges emerge where oceans exist today. Animals migrate across regions that later disappear beneath rising seas. When warmer periods return, glaciers melt. Coastlines retreat inland. Rivers carve new valleys. Forests reclaim frozen ground. Habitats suitable for one species may vanish within a few thousand years, while entirely new environments emerge elsewhere. Every climatic oscillation forces difficult choices. Some populations adapt where they are. Others migrate. Some likely disappear altogether, because the archaeological record preserves only fragments. Entire populations may vanish without leaving recognizable fossils. Modern researchers increasingly discover evidence through ancient DNA preserved inside cave sediments, revealing human occupation even when no bones survive. These surprising findings suggest that prehistoric diversity may have been even greater than currently known. At the same time, predators remain constant companions. Cave lions, giant hyenas, saber-toothed cats during earlier periods, packs of wolves, enormous bears and crocodiles in warmer regions all compete with humans for territory and food. Survival depends not merely on intelligence, but on cooperation, awareness, endurance, and adaptability. Children born into these ancient communities learn practical knowledge long before adulthood. They recognize edible plants, identify dangerous animals, understand seasonal migrations, and memorize the locations of reliable water sources. Much of this information exists only in memory. There are no written records, no maps, no permanent archives beyond what each generation teaches the next. Knowledge, therefore, becomes as valuable as physical strength. Lose enough experienced elders during a harsh winter, prolonged drought, or epidemic, and an entire community may lose survival strategies accumulated across centuries. What appears to modern observers as a simple demographic decline may actually represent the collapse of an irreplaceable store of ecological knowledge. The evidence increasingly suggests that prehistoric humans are far more flexible than earlier generations of scientists once imagined. Different populations exploit shellfish along coastlines, hunt massive herbivores across open plains, gather forest resources and adapt to environments ranging from tropical wetlands to freezing tundra. They are not primitive caricatures struggling against nature. They're capable, inventive humans responding to extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Yet despite these remarkable achievements, the human family continues branching. Some lineages flourish across Europe, others spread through Asia. Still others remain within Africa, where new evolutionary pathways quietly unfold. None of these groups understands that they are becoming different species in the eyes of distant future scientists. They simply know their own landscapes, their own traditions, and the familiar faces surrounding each evening fire. Across the immense expanse of the old world, the human family grows larger than it will ever be again. Multiple species now share the planet at the same time, each shaped by different climates, different migrations, and different histories. Their paths are no longer running parallel forever. Soon they will begin to cross. The world grows colder again, but it never freezes into silence. Ice advances from the north in slow, relentless waves covering mountains and valleys, beneath sheets of frozen water that in places reach several kilometers in thickness. Far beyond the edge of the glaciers, temperatures fall, rainfall patterns shift, and entire ecosystems reorganize themselves. Rivers that once flowed freely become braided channels carrying meltwater from distant ice fields. Grasslands replace forests in some regions, while elsewhere forests retreat into isolated refuges where they wait for warmer centuries to return. Every change forces animals to move, and wherever animals migrate, humans eventually follow. The Ice Age is often imagined as a single endless winter, but the reality is far more complex. Over the last 2.5 million years, the Earth passes through repeated glacial and interglacial cycles. Long cold periods alternate with warmer intervals, though neither remains stable for very long on evolutionary timescales. Temperatures can fluctuate dramatically over only a few thousand years and occasionally even faster. What appears permanent to one generation may disappear entirely before the descendants of that generation reach old age. For human populations, these cycles create both danger and opportunity. Lower sea levels expose enormous stretches of land now hidden beneath oceans. The broad plain connecting Britain to mainland Europe, known today by archaeologists as Doggerland, becomes a thriving landscape crossed by rivers, lakes, forests, and herds of grazing animals. Farther east, the land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska opens repeatedly, allowing animals and eventually humans to move between continents. Islands that later become isolated are temporarily linked to larger land masses, changing migration routes in ways almost impossible to recognize today without geological evidence. These changing landscapes reward flexibility rather than permanence. Communities that rely too heavily on one food source risk disaster when climates shift. Those capable of adjusting hunting strategies, seasonal movements, and social organization often fare better. Survival increasingly depends not on mastering a single environment, but on responding quickly when that environment changes. In Western Eurasia, one human species gradually becomes especially well adapted to the demanding conditions of Ice Age Europe. These are the Neanderthals. For generations they are portrayed as crude, slow-witted cavemen destined to disappear before superior modern humans. Over the past several decades, that image steadily dissolves under the weight of new discoveries. Neanderthals possess large brains comparable in size to and sometimes exceeding those of modern humans. Their bodies are powerfully built with broad chests, muscular limbs, and features that help conserve heat in cold climates. Their noses are larger than those of modern humans, possibly assisting in warming and humidifying icy air before it reaches the lungs. These are not accidental characteristics. They reflect hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to environments that would challenge even experienced modern explorers. Their archaeological record reveals remarkable skill. Neanderthals manufacture sophisticated stone tools using carefully prepared techniques that require planning several steps ahead. They hunt large and dangerous animals, including bison, wild horses, giant deer, and sometimes mammoths. Evidence from cut marks on bones and carefully organized campsites suggests that hunting is coordinated rather than random. Bringing down massive prey requires communication, cooperation, and considerable courage. Fire remains central to daily life. Hearths provide warmth during bitter winters, illuminate caves during long nights, and create places where food can be cooked and tools repaired. Charcoal preserved beneath layers of sediment silently marks occupations separated by thousands of years. Around these fires, practical knowledge almost certainly passes from one generation to the next, even though the exact nature of their language remains uncertain. One of the most surprising discoveries concerns care within Neanderthal communities. Fossil skeletons reveal individuals who survive for years despite severe injuries that would have made independent living nearly impossible. Some lose limbs, others suffer crippling fractures or degenerative diseases, yet they continue living long after such injuries occur. What survives in the record suggests that companions provide food protection and assistance over extended periods. This evidence challenges simplistic assumptions about prehistoric life. Compassion leaves few direct traces in the archaeological record, yet the survival of vulnerable individuals strongly implies sustained social care. The exact motivations remain unknowable, but cooperation clearly extends beyond immediate survival. At roughly the same time, another mysterious human population occupies parts of Asia. Their existence remains completely unknown until the 21st century, when researchers examined DNA extracted from a tiny finger bone discovered inside Denisova cave in Siberia. The fossil itself is astonishingly small, yet the genetic information preserved within it transforms the understanding of human evolution. These people become known as the Denisovans. Unlike Neanderthals, Denisovans remain frustratingly elusive. Very few fossil remains have been confidently identified, and much of what scientists know comes not from skeletons but from ancient DNA. Genetic evidence indicates that Denisovans occupy a vast geographic range extending across much of Asia. Some populations may even reach Southeast Asia and nearby islands. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars continue debating the full extent of their distribution, but their influence proves far greater than the sparse fossil record initially suggests. Meanwhile, Africa continues nurturing populations of early Homo sapiens. These communities experience their own environmental pressures, technological innovations, and cultural developments. Far from existing in isolation, African populations exchange genes and ideas across shifting landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years. Increasing evidence suggests that modern humans do not emerge from one small isolated birthplace alone, but from a network of interconnected populations spread across different regions of the continent. This growing complexity changes how researchers understand human origins. Instead of a single dramatic event producing modern humanity, evolution appears increasingly dynamic, with populations repeatedly separating and reconnecting as climates fluctuate. Rivers, deserts, and forests alternately divide and unite communities, creating a constantly shifting mosaic of diversity. Climate continues acting as an invisible architect. During particularly harsh glacial phases, habitable regions shrink into scattered refuges where plants, animals, and humans persist under difficult conditions. As warmer climates return, these refuges become centres for renewed expansion. Entire populations spread outward once again, carrying with them unique genetic traits and cultural traditions shaped during periods of isolation. Large animals undergo similar pressures. Woolly mammoths migrate across open steppes stretching from Western Europe to northeastern Asia. Musk oxen, reindeer, and steppe bison dominate northern grasslands. Predators shadow these herds, creating ecosystems unlike anything existing today. Human survival depends on understanding these seasonal rhythms with extraordinary precision. Knowledge becomes cumulative. A successful hunting technique developed by one generation is refined by the next. Stone tool designs gradually improve through countless small adjustments. Children learn not only where food can be found, but also when landscapes become dangerous. A frozen river may serve as a winter highway, but transform into a deadly torrent during spring thaw. Survival belongs increasingly to those capable of remembering patterns extending beyond individual experience, yet even the most skilled populations cannot control the climate itself. Sudden cold events shorten growing seasons, droughts reduce available water, volcanic eruptions occasionally darken skies and disrupt ecosystems across enormous distances. Most environmental crises leave only subtle traces in geological records, but together they create relentless instability that no human group can fully escape. Across Africa, Europe, and Asia, several human species now inhabit overlapping worlds shaped by the same unpredictable planet. They hunt many of the same animals. They rely on fire. They raise children, bury some of their dead, and pass knowledge through generations. For long periods, they remain separated by geography, but changing climates steadily narrow those distances. The stage is being prepared for encounters unlike any that have happened before. Different kinds of humans, each carrying hundreds of thousands of years of separate evolution, are slowly moving toward one another. When they finally meet, the future of every human lineage will begin to change in ways none of them could possibly imagine. The first meeting leaves no written account, no carved monument, and no surviving witness. Somewhere across the vast landscapes of Western Asia, perhaps in a wooded valley along a river crossing, or near the entrance of a cave overlooking an open plain, two different kinds of humans see one another for the first time. Each recognizes something strangely familiar. The posture is upright. The hands carry stone tools. Firelight reflects from equally curious eyes. Yet the faces are different enough to make the encounter unmistakable. These are not simply strangers from another valley. They belong to populations that have followed separate evolutionary paths for hundreds of thousands of years. For generations, scientists imagine these encounters as brief and violent. The prevailing image is one of immediate hostility, with modern humans sweeping across Eurasia and quickly replacing every other human species through superior intelligence or aggression. As new archaeological discoveries accumulate, that simple narrative becomes increasingly difficult to defend. The evidence reveals something far more complicated, one that includes conflict certainly, but also cooperation, coexistence, and even families formed across species boundaries. The strongest evidence comes not from stone tools or fossil bones alone, but from the genetic code carried by billions of people alive today. Nearly every person whose ancestry lies primarily outside Africa inherits a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA. This genetic inheritance is impossible without successful interbreeding. At multiple moments in prehistory, modern humans and Neanderthals do more than merely encounter one another. They produce children whose descendants survive long enough for those ancient genes to remain present tens of thousands of years later. This realization transforms one of the oldest assumptions about human evolution. Neanderthals are not entirely separate creatures incapable of mixing with Homo sapiens. They are close relatives. Their evolutionary paths diverge several 100,000 years earlier, yet not so completely that biological barriers prevent reproduction. The family tree once imagined as cleanly separated branches begins to resemble a web connected by occasional crossings. The same pattern later appears elsewhere. Populations living across parts of Asia and Oceania inherit genetic material from the Denisovans. In places such as New Guinea and neighbouring regions, Denisovan ancestry reaches levels far higher than researchers initially expect. Certain indigenous populations carry genetic signatures that point to encounters with Denisovan groups somewhere in Southeast Asia, although the precise locations remain uncertain because fossil evidence from those regions is still remarkably scarce. Even more surprising genetic research suggests that Denisovans themselves may interbreed with Neanderthals. One remarkable fossil discovered in Denisova Cave belongs to the daughter of a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. She lives more than 90,000 years ago, and her bones preserve direct evidence of parents from two different human species. Her existence demonstrates that such encounters are not theoretical possibilities, but lived realities. What survives in the record suggests that these meetings occur repeatedly over thousands of years, rather than during a single dramatic migration. Human populations move gradually expanding and contracting with changing climates. Valleys become shared hunting grounds. Rivers become travel corridors. Mountain passes that are blocked by snow for centuries eventually reopen during warmer periods. Every environmental change creates fresh opportunities for neighbouring groups to meet. Not every meeting is peaceful. Resources remain limited. During harsh winters or prolonged droughts, competition for hunting territories, freshwater sources and sheltered caves becomes intense. Archaeological evidence occasionally reveals injuries consistent with interpersonal violence, though determining exactly who inflicts them is often impossible. A fractured skull or healed spear wound does not identify whether the attacker belongs to the same community or another human population. Scholars therefore remain cautious, recognizing that prehistoric conflict almost certainly exists, but resisting overly simple conclusions. At the same time, similarities between different human groups become increasingly difficult to ignore. Neanderthals manufacture adhesives by heating birch bark under controlled conditions, a process requiring careful temperature management. Modern humans develop equally sophisticated methods for producing composite tools. Both groups control fire, prepare animal hides, and exploit seasonal resources with impressive efficiency. These shared abilities suggest that complex thinking is widespread across the human family rather than exclusive to Homo sapiens. Burial practices offer another intriguing glimpse into their inner worlds. Several Neanderthal sites contain bodies deliberately placed within shallow graves. Some are associated with stone tools, animal bones, or pollen, although interpretations remain debated. Earlier claims of elaborate flower burials have become more controversial, as new analyses question whether natural processes might explain the pollen concentrations. The evidence remains incomplete, yet deliberate treatment of the dead appears increasingly likely at several locations. Modern humans also begin leaving more obvious symbolic traces. Beads carved from shells, carefully shaped ornaments, pigments such as red ochre, and eventually cave paintings become more common in parts of Africa and later Europe. Whether Neanderthals independently create symbolic art or adopt certain practices through cultural contact remains an active area of research. Recent discoveries of cave markings, engraved objects, and possible decorative use of eagle claws suggest that symbolic behavior among Neanderthals may be older and more widespread than once believed. If so, the boundary between these human species grows even less distinct. Culture itself may move between populations just as genes do. Stone tool techniques sometimes spread across neighbouring regions with surprising speed. Archaeologists debate whether these similarities result from direct teaching, independent invention, or occasional exchanges between different communities. No single explanation fully accounts for every pattern, but increasing evidence favors a prehistoric world where ideas travel alongside people. These encounters also reshape disease ecology. Whenever previously separated populations meet, microorganisms accompany them. Viruses, bacteria, and parasites invisible to the naked eye may pass between communities with unpredictable consequences. Unfortunately, the archaeological record preserves only faint clues regarding ancient epidemics. Genetic evidence occasionally identifies inherited immune adaptations, suggesting that exposure to unfamiliar pathogens influences survival, but the full picture remains beyond recovery. Children born from mixed ancestry inherit combinations of traits that neither parent possesses alone. Most of those ancient individuals disappear into the distant past without recognition, yet fragments of their genetic inheritance persist. Some Neanderthal genes influence skin biology, immune function, metabolism, and even responses to high-altitude environments when combined with Denisovan contributions in certain populations. Evolution does not simply erase extinct relatives. Instead, pieces of them continue adapting within surviving humans. Still, coexistence is never perfectly balanced. Modern human populations gradually become more numerous across parts of Eurasia. Archaeological sites associated with Homo sapiens begin appearing across wider geographic areas. Their hunting ranges expand. Their exchange networks seem to stretch farther. Decorative objects crafted from shells or rare stones sometimes travel hundreds of kilometers from their original source, implying long-distance social connections extending beyond immediate neighboring groups. These expanding networks may provide advantages difficult to measure directly. Communities connected through broader alliances can exchange information about distant food supplies, environmental changes, and valuable resources. If one local population suffers a severe decline, neighboring groups may help replenish numbers through migration and marriage. Small, isolated populations lack such resilience. The significance of these differences is not immediately obvious. Neanderthals remain highly successful across Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. Denisovans continue occupying parts of Asia. Other human groups survive in isolated environments. Nothing about the archaeological record suggests an inevitable collapse. Yet beneath the surface, subtle shifts are accumulating. Climate grows increasingly unstable. Populations move more frequently. Encounters become more common. Ideas, genes, and perhaps diseases begin crossing boundaries that remain separated for immense spans of time. The human world, once divided into largely independent evolutionary branches, is becoming connected for the first time. That growing connection will soon change the fate of every human species on Earth. The stone point resting beneath a layer of ancient sediment appears unremarkable at first glance. It is no larger than the palm of a hand chipped from a carefully chosen piece of flint, its edges sharpened with remarkable precision. Yet under careful examination, it reveals a story far greater than the object itself. Tiny fractures along its base indicate that it is once attached to a wooden shaft. Microscopic traces of plant resin still cling to one side, while faint residues of animal blood remain preserved in protected crevices. This is no simple cutting tool. It is part of a carefully engineered hunting weapon, one assembled from multiple materials that must be gathered, processed, and combined through deliberate planning. Across prehistoric Eurasia and Africa, such discoveries become increasingly common. Human technology is no longer advancing through isolated inventions. Instead, knowledge accumulates across generations, with each improvement building upon countless earlier discoveries. A sharper blade saves effort. A stronger adhesive prevents weapons from breaking. Better clothing allows survival through colder winters. Small innovations repeated over thousands of years gradually reshape the balance between humans and the demanding environments they inhabit. One of the greatest advantages possessed by Homo sapiens may not be superior intelligence in any simple sense, but an exceptional ability to preserve and expand collective knowledge. Every generation inherits more than genes. It inherits techniques, observations, stories, seasonal patterns, and practical solutions refined by countless ancestors. The larger and more interconnected a population becomes, the harder it is for valuable knowledge to disappear entirely. Archaeologists often describe this process as cumulative culture. Unlike instincts encoded by evolution, cumulative culture allows information to grow steadily over time. One hunter discovers a more effective spear design. Another improves the balance of the shaft. Someone else learns that heating certain stones before shaping them produces cleaner fractures. None of these innovations transforms the world overnight, but together they create technological traditions that become increasingly sophisticated. Fire continues playing a central role in this transformation. Long before metalworking exists, prehistoric communities learn that heat changes materials in surprising ways. Wooden spear shafts become harder when carefully dried near flames. Certain stones fracture more predictably after controlled heating. Sticky resins soften over fire before hardening into durable adhesives as they cool. Pigments change color depending on temperature. Mastery of fire is no longer limited to warmth and cooking. It becomes an experimental tool for altering the physical properties of the world itself. Evidence from archaeological sites suggests that modern humans also begin producing a wider variety of specialized tools than many earlier populations. Instead of relying primarily on large hand axes or general-purpose implements, they increasingly manufacture smaller blades designed for particular tasks. Fine cutting tools process hides. Bone needles allow tailored clothing to fit more closely against the body, reducing heat loss during harsh winters. Fishing implements appear in some regions. Harpoons and barbed points expand access to rivers, lakes, and coastal waters. These developments broaden the range of available food. A community capable of hunting large mammals, catching fish, gathering shellfish, trapping small animals, collecting edible plants, and exploiting seasonal bird migrations, possesses more options when one resource becomes scarce. Flexibility becomes a form of insurance against environmental uncertainty. Scholars still debate exactly how much technological difference exists between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Many Neanderthal tools are remarkably sophisticated, and some innovations once believed unique to modern humans are now known to appear among Neanderthal populations as well. The evidence remains incomplete, reminding researchers that archaeology often preserves only fragments of ancient behavior. Nevertheless, modern human toolkits generally become more diverse through time, particularly after expanding into Eurasia. The importance of clothing is easy to underestimate because animal hides, woven fibers, and leather rarely survive for tens of thousands of years. Yet indirect evidence strongly suggests that well-fitted garments become increasingly advanced. Bone needles with carefully drilled eyes appear in archaeological sites dating to the Upper Paleolithic. Such needles imply stitching rather than merely wrapping hides around the body. Tailored clothing provides enormous advantages. It allows longer journeys through freezing conditions. It reduces energy lost to cold. It protects children and elderly individuals during severe winters. It extends the seasons during which hunting parties can travel safely. In a world repeatedly reshaped by Ice Age climates, these seemingly modest improvements may significantly influence survival. The human mind is changing as well, though not necessarily through sudden biological evolution. Increasingly complex societies demand increasing mental flexibility. Individuals must remember seasonal roots, identify dozens of edible plant species, recognize animal behavior, maintain social relationships, manufacture tools, and teach younger generations. Language, whatever precise form it takes, almost certainly becomes richer as knowledge expands. Language itself leaves no fossils. No ancient voice survives inside the archaeological record, yet its effects appear everywhere. Complex technologies spread, knowledge accumulates, cooperation extends beyond immediate family groups. These achievements strongly imply increasingly sophisticated communication. Some of the most remarkable evidence comes from objects carrying no obvious practical function. Shell beads transported far inland, pieces of red ochre deliberately collected and processed, animal teeth modified into ornaments, carefully engraved patterns carved into bone or stone. Such items require time and effort without directly improving hunting efficiency or food gathering. Why invest precious energy in creating them? Scholars propose several explanations. Decorative objects may signal identity, strengthen social bonds, indicate family relationships, display achievements, or simply satisfy an aesthetic appreciation already present within the human mind. No single explanation fully accounts for every discovery, but symbolic behavior appears increasingly widespread among expanding Homo sapiens populations. Symbols possess extraordinary power. Unlike physical strength, symbols allow strangers to recognize shared identity before exchanging a single word. A familiar ornament, distinctive pattern, or recognizable decoration may communicate membership within wider social networks, extending far beyond one local settlement. Those wider networks prove increasingly important. Archaeologists discover stone materials transported hundreds of kilometers from their geological source. Marine shells appear far inland. Pigments move across large regions. Such findings suggest that prehistoric exchange networks connect communities separated by enormous distances. Individuals may not travel every route themselves, but objects and information pass gradually from group to group. Imagine two neighboring communities meeting during favorable seasons. One possesses high-quality flint unavailable elsewhere. Another controls access to coastal shellfish. A third knows migration routes across distant valleys. Exchanging resources strengthens relationships while reducing risk. If drought strikes one region, neighboring communities may offer refuge or information about alternative food supplies. These social connections become survival mechanisms every bit as important as technological innovation. Small isolated populations face a different reality. A harsh winter may kill experienced hunters. Disease may remove skilled toolmakers. A failed hunting season may leave too few adults to care for children. Without broader alliances, recovery becomes far more difficult. Population size itself begins influencing cultural survival. Larger interconnected populations preserve innovations more effectively because knowledge exists in many individuals simultaneously. Even if one group disappears, neighboring communities continue practicing the same techniques. Cultural memory becomes distributed rather than fragile. Meanwhile, the environments surrounding these ancient people remain unforgiving. Massive herds continue moving across grasslands. Glaciers advance and retreat. Volcanic eruptions occasionally darken skies. Droughts transform fertile valleys into barren landscapes. Adaptation is never complete because the world itself refuses to remain stable. Every improvement therefore buys time rather than guaranteeing safety. A better spear increases hunting success. Warmer clothing reduces winter deaths. Broader alliances ease local shortages. Improved communication preserves valuable knowledge. None of these developments alone explains why Homo sapiens ultimately survives while other human species disappear. Yet together they create something increasingly powerful: resilience. Resilience is difficult to recognize in a single archaeological site. It emerges only when viewed across continents and thousands of years. One community invents, another preserves, a third adapts, A fourth carries ideas into entirely new landscapes. Piece by piece, the surviving human lineage becomes more than a collection of isolated bands. It becomes an expanding web of connected populations capable of learning faster than the changing world can erase their accumulated experience. Soon that growing resilience will face its greatest test as the climate itself enters one of the most unstable periods in the entire history of human evolution. No community can see the full extent of the network forming around it. A hunting band crossing an open valley knows the neighbouring families who return each spring. A group camped beside a river recognises familiar faces arriving, with fresh stone shells, pigments, or stories gathered from distant landscapes. Beyond that horizon lies another circle of acquaintances, and beyond them another still. Over countless generations, these overlapping connections gradually stretch across enormous distances. The people involved never perceive the entire web, yet they become part of one of the greatest survival systems ever created by any human species. This expanding social world leaves surprisingly subtle traces in the archaeological record. A bead carved from a marine shell appears hundreds of kilometers inland. Obsidian from a volcanic source travels into regions where no volcano exists. Amber rare pigments and unusually fine stone move from hand to hand across landscapes too vast for any single individual to cross regularly. The objects themselves are valuable, but the relationships behind them may be even more important. Every exchange carries more than material goods. Along with a sharpened blade comes a new method of shaping stone. Along with a decorative shell comes news of migrating animals. Along with rare pigments come stories about distant rivers, unfamiliar valleys, dangerous predators, or unusually harsh winters. Knowledge begins travelling farther than people themselves. In modern societies, information moves almost instantly across continents. In the Ice Age world, every message travels at the speed of human footsteps. Even so, ideas can gradually spread across astonishing distances. A useful innovation adopted by one community may appear hundreds of kilometers away. Several generations later, carried indirectly through countless meetings between neighbouring groups. This slow circulation of knowledge may become one of the defining strengths of Homo sapiens. Scholars continue debating exactly how extensive these prehistoric social networks are. The archaeological evidence remains incomplete, and preservation varies greatly between regions. Yet the growing distribution of exotic materials strongly suggests that many populations maintain connections well beyond their immediate territories. These relationships reduce isolation, making communities more resilient when local conditions suddenly deteriorate. Imagine a severe drought affecting one valley. Animals disappear, water sources shrink, edible plants fail. An isolated group faces immediate crisis. A connected group possesses another option. Someone remembers relatives living several weeks away near a larger river. Others know of seasonal camps beyond the mountains where food remains abundant. Alliances built during prosperous years become lifelines during desperate ones. These relationships are not acts of charity in the modern sense. They are investments in mutual survival. Every community understands that fortunes change. Today's provider may become tomorrow's refugee. Maintaining friendships, marriage ties, and exchange partnerships across different environments spreads risk in a world where certainty never exists. Marriage itself likely plays a significant role in maintaining these connections. Genetic studies of ancient populations increasingly suggest that individuals often move between communities rather than remaining exclusively within the group into which they are born. Such movement prevents excessive inbreeding while strengthening alliances between neighbouring populations. A marriage is therefore more than a family event. It becomes a bridge linking different communities, landscapes, and bodies of knowledge. This constant exchange shapes culture as much as biology. Children grow up hearing stories from multiple traditions. Hunting techniques learned in one region merge with methods developed elsewhere. New tool designs spread without replacing older ones entirely. The result is not uniformity but flexibility. Different communities preserve local expertise while remaining open to useful innovations arriving from outside. Evidence from cave sites across Europe reveals another fascinating pattern. Artistic traditions begin appearing over increasingly large geographic areas. Painted animals, engraved symbols, carved figurines, and decorated tools display both regional differences and surprising similarities. Scholars still debate the precise meanings of these images. Some may represent spiritual beliefs. Others could record seasonal knowledge, clan identities, or successful hunting traditions. The evidence cannot answer every question, but one conclusion grows increasingly persuasive. Symbolic communication has become deeply embedded within many Homo sapien societies. Symbols create powerful social cohesion. Two strangers meeting far from home may recognize familiar markings, ornaments, or artistic styles that signal shared cultural traditions. Trust forms more easily when identity extends beyond immediate family. Cooperation between unrelated individuals becomes less risky when both belong to a wider cultural network. Trust itself becomes a survival technology. Predators cannot be defeated by one hunter alone. Large animals require coordinated effort. Children survive difficult winters because many adults contribute to their care. Knowledge survives because experienced elders patiently teach younger generations. No single invention explains human success as effectively as cooperation. Neanderthals also cooperate extensively. Their care for injured companions demonstrates strong social bonds. They hunt collaboratively and share resources within their communities. The difference may lie less in whether cooperation exists and more in its scale. Many researchers propose that Homo sapiens maintain broader, more flexible networks, linking larger numbers of unrelated individuals across wider territories. The exact extent of this difference remains uncertain. Some archaeological sites suggest Neanderthal groups occasionally exchange materials across moderate distances. Other evidence hints at cultural transmission between neighboring populations. Scholars continue debating whether these networks are fundamentally smaller, or whether preservation simply obscures their full complexity. Nevertheless, demographic patterns reveal an important clue. Population density among Homo sapiens gradually increases in several regions. Larger populations generate more innovations simply because more individuals are experimenting, observing, and solving problems simultaneously. They also reduce the risk of losing valuable knowledge. If one expert dies, others still remember the technique. Small populations face a much greater danger. A single harsh winter may eliminate the only skilled maker of certain tools. A disease outbreak may remove most experienced hunters. Several consecutive poor seasons may reduce numbers below the threshold needed for recovery. This process, known among researchers as demographic fragility, becomes increasingly significant. Once populations become very small, chance events matter enormously. A rockfall blocks access to a cave. A flood destroys stored food. A hunting accident claims several adults. A few unlucky years may permanently alter the future of an isolated community. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens continue expanding into remarkably diverse environments. Some groups settle along productive coastlines, harvesting shellfish, fish seabirds, and marine mammals. Coastal resources provide relatively stable food supplies, compared with the unpredictable migrations of large land animals. Other populations specialize in open grasslands, while still others adapt to forests, wetlands, or mountainous terrain. This ecological flexibility proves invaluable. If one habitat becomes less productive, neighboring populations occupying different environments may continue thriving. The species as a whole therefore spreads its risk across multiple ecosystems rather than depending upon a single ecological strategy. Children born into these expanding societies inherit an increasingly rich cultural world. They learn not only how to shape stone, but which stone produces the strongest blades. They learn where rivers flood safely and where hidden currents become deadly. They memorize the migrations of animals across seasons stretching far beyond personal experience. They inherit stories that encode practical survival knowledge in memorable forms. Culture becomes an external memory extending beyond any individual lifespan. The growing complexity of this shared memory changes humanity's relationship with evolution itself. Biological evolution still operates, but cultural adaptation now responds far more quickly than genes alone ever could. A new tool can spread within a generation. A successful hunting method may transform an entire region within decades. Warm clothing can be improved without waiting thousands of years for physical adaptations. Knowledge begins outpacing biology. That shift may become one of the defining characteristics separating the eventual survivor from its closest relatives. Yet even the strongest social networks cannot control the greatest force shaping prehistoric life. Far beyond the campsites and hunting grounds, the Earth's climate is preparing another dramatic transformation. The environments supporting every human species are about to become even less predictable than before, and the resilience built through cooperation will soon face an unprecedented trial. The first signs are almost impossible to notice within a single lifetime. A familiar river freezes a little earlier than usual. The spring thaw arrives slightly later. Herds that once crossed a valley every autumn begin appearing several weeks behind their old schedule. Certain flowering plants become less common. A marsh slowly dries. Elsewhere, another region receives heavier rains than anyone remembers. No single change seems extraordinary on its own, yet together they signal that the planet is once again entering a period of profound environmental instability. For prehistoric humans, climate is not simply the background to daily life. It is the invisible force governing nearly everything. It determines where forests grow, where rivers flow, where animals migrate, and where edible plants can survive. A modest shift in average temperature can trigger cascading effects across entire ecosystems. Grasslands expand into former woodlands, cold-adapted animals push southward, lakes shrink into seasonal wetlands, coastlines advance or retreat as sea levels fluctuate. Every alteration forces humans to reconsider routes, hunting grounds, and places safe enough to call home. Unlike modern societies, these ancient communities possess no stored reserves capable of supporting years of failed harvests. There are no granaries, no trade ships crossing oceans, no distant governments sending relief. Survival depends directly on what the surrounding landscape can provide. When the environment changes, people must change with it. One of the most dramatic examples occurs during episodes known today as abrupt climate events. Geological records preserved in Greenland ice cores, cave formations, and ocean sediments reveal that some climatic transitions happen surprisingly quickly. In certain cases, regional temperatures shift significantly within only decades. To a human community, such changes would feel almost immediate. Children born into one climate might reach adulthood in a noticeably different world. The consequences ripple outward. If colder conditions shorten growing seasons, grazing animals find less food. Smaller herds support fewer predators. Hunters must travel farther. Longer journeys consume more energy. Children and elderly individuals become increasingly vulnerable when food grows scarce. The challenge is not merely finding enough calories. It is maintaining stability in a constantly changing landscape. Neanderthals experienced these pressures with particular intensity. Much of their range lies across Europe and Western Asia regions repeatedly transformed by advancing and retreating glaciers. Their remarkable adaptations allow them to survive conditions that would overwhelm many other species. They endure freezing winters, hunt large Ice Age mammals, and exploit harsh environments for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet specialization carries hidden risks. A body optimized for cold climates performs exceptionally well within those conditions. A hunting strategy focused on large herbivores succeeds while those animals remain abundant. Communities familiar with predictable seasonal migrations flourish, as long as those migrations continue. When ecosystems begin reorganizing more rapidly, however, specialization becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Large prey populations sometimes decline or shift into new territories. Forests replace open grasslands in certain regions. Rising temperatures alter vegetation patterns. Some familiar resources disappear while unfamiliar ones become available. Communities capable of adjusting quickly gain an advantage. Those less able to adapt face growing uncertainty. Modern humans appear particularly flexible in this regard. Archaeological evidence suggests that many Homo sapiens populations exploit a broader variety of food sources than some earlier human groups. Coastal communities harvest shellfish, fish, seabirds, and marine mammals. Inland groups continue hunting large animals, but also rely more heavily on smaller game-edible plants, nuts, seeds, and freshwater resources where available. This dietary diversity acts as a buffer against environmental disruption. If mammoth numbers decline, other foods remain. If one river fails, neighboring wetlands may still provide fish. If drought reduces plant growth in one valley, exchange networks connect communities to regions experiencing different conditions. No single strategy guarantees success. Instead, resilience emerges from maintaining multiple options simultaneously. The archaeological record repeatedly demonstrates that environmental crises rarely eliminate every resource at once. The problem lies in knowing how to exploit alternatives quickly enough. Knowledge accumulated through generations becomes invaluable. Communities familiar with many ecosystems adapt more readily than those deeply dependent upon one. Volcanic eruptions occasionally intensify these challenges. One eruption in particular has attracted enormous scientific interest: the massive eruption of Mount Toba on the Indonesian island of Sumatra, approximately 74,000 years ago. For many years, some researchers argue that this event causes a catastrophic volcanic winter that nearly drives modern humans to extinction. Today, that hypothesis is viewed with greater caution. The eruption is unquestionably enormous, ranking among the largest known volcanic events of the last several million years. Ash falls across vast areas of Asia, and atmospheric effects likely influence regional climates. However, increasing archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that Homo sapiens populations survive in Africa and elsewhere more successfully than the original catastrophe model proposes. Scholars still debate the full extent of Toba's impact. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every observation. Even so, the discussion highlights an important reality. Prehistoric humans repeatedly confront environmental disasters capable of reshaping entire regions. Volcanoes are only one example. Extended droughts reduce freshwater supplies. Changing monsoon systems transform fertile landscapes into arid plains. Severe cold periods compress habitable zones. Flooding follows, melting glaciers permanently drowning ancient coastlines where many communities once lived. These losses are especially difficult for archaeologists because rising seas conceal countless prehistoric settlements beneath modern oceans. During the height of the last ice age, global sea levels stand more than 100 meters lower than today. Broad coastal plains attract both animals and humans, offering abundant food and relatively mild climates. When the glaciers melt, those landscapes disappear. Entire valleys vanish beneath advancing seas. River mouths become submerged estuaries. Ancient campsites sink beyond the reach of ordinary excavation. What survives in the archaeological record therefore represents only part of humanity's story. Much of the evidence now lies underwater. Climate also affects population size in subtle ways. Favorable centuries encourage expansion. Families grow. Communities spread into neighboring territories. Connections multiply. Then unfavorable conditions reverse the process. Groups become isolated. Numbers decline. Genetic diversity shrinks. random chance begins playing a larger role in determining survival. Population bottlenecks emerge repeatedly throughout human history. Some affect individual regions, others influence entire species. Genetic studies indicate that modern humans themselves experience periods when their total breeding population becomes surprisingly small. The exact numbers remain debated, but researchers broadly agree that our ancestors passed through several episodes during which humanity is far less numerous than many people imagine. That realization changes the perspective entirely. Homo sapiens is never guaranteed success. For long stretches of prehistory, extinction remains a genuine possibility. A few consecutive environmental disasters combined with declining population could easily have altered the outcome. The difference between survival and disappearance may sometimes depend on events too small to leave any trace in the archaeological record. A successful hunt, a surviving child, a timely migration, a neighboring community willing to share resources. Evolution is often portrayed as an orderly process driven solely by natural selection. In reality, history is shaped by both adaptation and contingency. Skill matters, intelligence matters, cooperation matters, but so does fortune. As climates continue fluctuating across Eurasia and Africa, every human species enters a period of mounting pressure. Resources become less predictable. Habitats shift. Populations fragment. The ancient human family, once spread broadly across continents, begins showing signs of strain. Some branches remain resilient, others quietly diminish. The greatest mystery is that these changes unfold gradually enough that no generation fully recognizes the larger pattern. Only thousands of years later, when archaeologists compare scattered fossils, ancient DNA, and buried campsites across continents, does the slow disappearance begin to emerge. By then, several members of the human family have already entered the final chapters of their existence. The silence does not arrive all at once. No single season marks the last Neanderthal hunt. No final gathering takes place around a fire where everyone somehow realizes that their kind is approaching its end. Extinction rarely announces itself. More often it unfolds through countless ordinary moments that seem insignificant to those living through them. A camp is abandoned after a poor hunting season. A valley no longer supports enough game. A small family joins another community farther south. A child is never born because the population has become too small. Generation after generation, the spaces between surviving groups quietly widen, until one day there is no neighboring community left to meet. This gradual disappearance defines much of the human story during the later stages of the Ice Age. For decades, archaeologists search for evidence of a sudden replacement, imagining that modern humans sweep across Europe in a rapid wave that overwhelms the Neanderthals almost immediately. The more evidence accumulates, the more complicated the picture becomes. Radiocarbon dating, improved excavation methods, and ancient DNA reveal that both species occupy parts of Europe simultaneously for several thousand years. The exact duration varies by region, but coexistence appears far longer than once believed. During those overlapping millennia, Neanderthals do not simply vanish overnight. They continue hunting. They continue making tools. They continue raising children. Life remains recognizable until slowly fewer traces begin appearing. The reasons remain one of the greatest unresolved questions in human evolution. Some researchers emphasize competition. Homo sapiens populations gradually expand into territories already occupied by Neanderthals. More numerous communities may consume resources more efficiently or occupy strategic migration routes used by large animals. Even small differences in population growth can produce enormous consequences over thousands of years. A species increasing slightly faster than another eventually occupies a much greater proportion of the landscape. Other scholars focus on demographics rather than direct competition. Evidence increasingly suggests that many Neanderthal groups remain relatively small and scattered. Small populations face serious challenges even under favorable conditions. They are more vulnerable to accidental deaths, disease outbreaks, failed hunting seasons, and a loss of genetic diversity. If neighboring communities become too distant, finding unrelated marriage partners becomes increasingly difficult. Inbreeding may rise, although the extent of its impact continues to be studied. Genetic evidence supports the idea that some late Neanderthal populations experience periods of reduced diversity. This does not necessarily mean they are unhealthy everywhere, but it indicates prolonged isolation in at least certain regions. Once numbers decline below a critical threshold, recovery becomes progressively more difficult. Imagine a network of villages connected by narrow roads. If one village disappears, travelers simply take another route. If half the villages vanish, communication slows. If only a handful remain, each additional loss has far greater consequences. Population networks function similarly. Every disappearing community weakens the resilience of those that remain. Climate almost certainly contributes to this process. Rapid environmental fluctuations repeatedly alter habitats across Europe. Forests expand into former grasslands. Large grazing animals shift their migration routes. River systems change. Communities adapted to one ecological pattern must repeatedly adjust to another. Homo sapiens appear especially capable of exploiting a wide variety of food sources, while some Neanderthal populations may remain more dependent on large terrestrial mammals, although scholars caution that regional variation is considerable. No single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. Instead, extinction likely emerges through the interaction of many pressures operating simultaneously. Climate reduces available habitat. Population fragmentation limits recovery. Competition increases. Interbreeding absorbs some individuals into expanding Homo sapiens populations. Random chance amplifies every setback. Together, these factors gradually reshape the human landscape. By approximately 40,000 years ago, unmistakable Neanderthal communities disappear from the archaeological record. Yet disappearance is not the same as complete erasure. Their genes remain. Every modern person of predominantly Eurasian ancestry carries inherited Neanderthal DNA. Tiny fragments of their biological legacy continue circulating through billions of living people. Some inherited genes influence immune responses. Others affect skin biology, hair characteristics, metabolism, and sensitivity to sunlight. Researchers continue discovering additional influences, though many remain subtle and depend upon interactions with other genes. In one sense, the Neanderthals vanish. In another, they never completely leave. The story of the Denisovans proves even more mysterious. Unlike Neanderthals, whose skeletons are now known from numerous sites across Europe and Western Asia, Denisovan fossils remain astonishingly rare. A few teeth, several bone fragments, pieces of a jaw discovered on the Tibetan plateau. These sparse remains contrast sharply with the enormous genetic footprint Denisovans leave in certain modern populations. People living in New Guinea, Australia, and parts of island Southeast Asia possess the highest levels of Denisovan ancestry identified so far. Other populations across Asia retain smaller but significant genetic contributions. One remarkable Denisovan-derived gene helps modern Tibetans tolerate low oxygen at extreme altitudes, providing a striking example of how inherited adaptations from extinct humans continue benefiting living populations. This discovery changes the meaning of extinction itself. A species may disappear physically while parts of its evolutionary solutions survive inside another. The Denisovans leave behind more than bones. They leave biological tools refined through hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation. Elsewhere, another remarkable branch of the human family quietly reaches its own conclusion. On the Indonesian island of Flores lives a diminutive species now known as Homo floresiensis. Standing roughly 1 meter tall, these humans occupy an isolated island environment for tens of thousands of years. Their small stature likely reflects island evolution, a phenomenon seen in many animal species where limited resources favour reduced body size. When their fossils are first announced in the early 21st century, they astonish the scientific world. Some researchers initially doubt that they represent a distinct species at all. Subsequent discoveries strengthen the case that Homo floresiensis is indeed a separate human lineage. Exactly why they disappear remains uncertain. Environmental changes, volcanic activity, ecological shifts, and perhaps the arrival of modern humans have all been proposed. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars continue debating the relative importance of each factor. A similar mystery surrounds Homo luzonensis discovered in the Philippines, from fossils dating to roughly 67,000 years ago. Like Homo floresiensis, this species demonstrates that human diversity persists in isolated regions far longer than anyone once imagined. These island populations remind researchers of an important lesson. The archaeological record remains profoundly incomplete. Entire human species remain unknown until a handful of fossils emerge from caves explored only recently. How many other populations disappear without leaving recognizable remains? No one can answer with confidence. Some may survive only as unidentified fragments. Others perhaps leave genetic traces yet to be recognized. Still others may have vanished so completely that no evidence remains. Even Homo erectus, one of humanity's longest-lasting relatives, eventually fades from the record after surviving for well over 1 million years. Across Asia, their populations gradually disappear through processes that remain only partially understood. The pattern repeats again and again. No single catastrophe eliminates the human family. Instead, different branches end at different times in different places for different combinations of reasons. By the close of this long process, a remarkable transformation has occurred. For most of prehistory, Earth is inhabited by several human species simultaneously. Now only one clearly remains. The silence spreading across the ancient landscapes is not the silence of an empty world. It is the silence left behind when familiar relatives are no longer there. The fires still burn, children still play, hunters still cross frozen plains, but every face now belongs to the same surviving lineage. The greatest question has therefore shifted. The mystery is no longer why other humans disappeared. It is why Homo sapiens alone remained standing when every other branch of the human family eventually faded into history. Long after the last Neanderthal campfire grows cold, and the final Denisovan communities disappear from the visible record, they continue travelling through time, in a place no archaeologist expects to find them. They survive not in caves, monuments, or buried settlements, but inside the cells of living people. Every heartbeat carries molecules that preserve fragments of encounters occurring tens of thousands of years ago. Every generation unknowingly passes those fragments to the next, quietly maintaining one of the oldest surviving records of human history. For most of scientific history, this possibility seems unimaginable. When Neanderthals are first recognized during the 19th century, many researchers assume they belong to a completely separate evolutionary line, one that ends without leaving descendants. Their bones appear ancient, their bodies distinct, and the prevailing belief holds that modern humans simply replace them. That assumption begins to crumble only after extraordinary advances in genetics during the early 21st century. Recovering ancient DNA is an astonishing technical achievement. Time steadily breaks genetic material into tiny fragments. Water heat bacteria and chemical reactions gradually destroy what once exists inside every living cell. For decades, scientists believe meaningful DNA from Ice Age humans is permanently lost. Then laboratory techniques improve. Researchers learn to extract minute fragments from exceptionally well-preserved fossils, especially those recovered from cold caves where degradation proceeds more slowly. Every sample requires extraordinary care because modern contamination poses a constant threat. Even a few stray skin cells from a researcher can overwhelm authentic ancient material. When the first complete Neanderthal genomes are finally reconstructed, they reveal something completely unexpected. Modern humans outside Africa consistently share small but unmistakable portions of Neanderthal DNA. The pattern is too widespread to dismiss as coincidence. Interbreeding has occurred. The implications extend far beyond simple ancestry. Rather than replacing one another without interaction, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals form families. Children are born. Those children have descendants. Generation after generation, portions of Neanderthal DNA continue moving through expanding modern human populations until they eventually reach billions of living people. Today, most individuals whose ancestry lies primarily outside sub-Saharan Africa inherit roughly 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, although the precise amount varies among populations. At first glance, that percentage appears surprisingly small. Yet viewed differently, it becomes remarkable. Different people inherit different fragments. When scientists combine genetic information from populations around the world, they recover a substantial proportion of the original Neanderthal genome preserved collectively across living humanity. No single person carries all of it. Humanity carries it together. The same story emerges from Denisovan genetics, although with intriguing regional differences. Populations in New Guinea and parts of island Southeast Asia possess the highest known levels of Denisovan ancestry. Some groups inherit several percent of their genomes from these mysterious relatives. East Asian populations retain smaller amounts, while traces appear elsewhere through complex patterns of migration and ancient population mixing. These discoveries transform extinct humans from isolated branches into continuing participants in our own biology. The inherited genes are not merely historical curiosities. Many remain biologically active. Researchers have identified Neanderthal-derived genetic variants influencing the immune system. Some appear to improve responses against certain pathogens encountered after humans expanded into Eurasia. Others affect inflammatory reactions, allergies, or susceptibility to autoimmune conditions. Evolution preserves some of these genes because under particular circumstances they provide advantages. Not every inherited gene remains beneficial forever. Traits favored in Ice Age environments do not necessarily remain useful in modern cities. A powerful immune response capable of defeating ancient infections may increase the likelihood of inflammatory diseases under very different living conditions. Genes always exist within changing environments. An adaptation is never universally good or bad. Its value depends upon the challenges surrounding it. One of the most remarkable examples involves life at extreme altitude. Millions of people today inhabit the Tibetan Plateau where oxygen levels remain dramatically lower than at sea level. Most visitors experience fatigue, headaches, and difficulty breathing until their bodies gradually adjust. Native Tibetan populations often respond differently. Many carry a version of the EPAS1 gene inherited from Denisovan ancestors. This genetic variant helps regulate the body's response to low oxygen, reducing the harmful overproduction of red blood cells that can occur at high elevations. It represents a striking case in which adaptation developed by an extinct human population continues supporting survival in modern environments. The discovery demonstrates something profound. Human evolution does not simply erase earlier experiments. Sometimes it incorporates them. Interbreeding allows successful adaptations to cross species boundaries, where natural selection can preserve them long after their original populations disappear. Scientists continue uncovering additional examples. Certain Neanderthal genes influence skin pigmentation and hair characteristics. Others affect fat metabolism. Some may alter pain sensitivity. Still others appear associated with sleep patterns or responses to ultraviolet radiation. Many proposed relationships remain under investigation, and researchers exercise caution because genetic interactions are extraordinarily complex. Rarely does one gene determine one trait by itself. Instead, countless genes interact with one another while responding to environmental influences throughout life. Ancient DNA also reveals something unexpected about human history itself. The ancestors of modern humans do not encounter Neanderthals only once. Multiple episodes of interbreeding likely occur across different regions and different periods. Similarly, Denisovan ancestry appears to reflect more than one ancient meeting. The prehistoric world is therefore far more interconnected than earlier generations imagine. Separate human populations repeatedly meet separate and reconnect over thousands of years. Genetics uncovers another fascinating mystery. Some portions of the Neanderthal genome are almost entirely absent from living humans. Natural selection appears to remove certain inherited variants over time. Why? The exact reasons remain debated. Some genes may prove disadvantageous when combined with Homo sapiens biology. Others may simply provide no particular benefit and gradually disappear through ordinary evolutionary processes. The surviving fragments therefore represent only part of the original inheritance. Evolution edits the genetic legacy continuously. Ancient DNA has transformed archaeology in another unexpected way. Researchers no longer require complete skeletons to identify prehistoric populations. Tiny fragments of DNA preserved in cave sediments now reveal which human groups occupy particular sites, even when no bones remain. A cave floor becomes an archive. Dust itself preserves history. These methods continue reshaping understanding of prehistoric migrations. Communities once thought isolated are shown to maintain unexpected connections. Previously unknown movements across Eurasia emerge from genetic comparisons. Even relationships among African populations become increasingly complex as new evidence accumulates. Yet despite these remarkable advances, many mysteries endure. Ancient DNA survives only under favorable conditions. Warm tropical climates rapidly destroy genetic material, leaving enormous regions of Africa, Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world underrepresented. Entire chapters of human evolution remain hidden simply because the environments where they occur are poor at preserving DNA. The fossil record shares similar limitations. Caves preserve remains better than open landscapes. Acidic soils dissolve bones. Rising seas bury ancient coastlines. Dense forests conceal sites beneath layers of vegetation. Every new discovery therefore arrives with an important reminder. The story remains unfinished. Somewhere beneath modern deserts, river sediments, forests, or submerged continental shelves may lie evidence capable of changing humanity's family tree once again. The surviving genetic traces also challenge a deeper assumption. Extinction is often imagined as absolute. One day a species exists, the next it does not. Reality proves subtler. Neanderthals vanish as distinct communities. Denisovans disappear as recognizable populations. Yet parts of them continue adapting within Homo sapiens. They become threads woven into a larger human tapestry. The sole surviving species is therefore not entirely alone. Within every inherited fragment lies a quiet reminder that survival is rarely a story of complete victory or total loss. It is often a story of merging, adapting, remembering, and carrying pieces of the past into futures that no ancient human could ever have imagined. Still, genes alone cannot explain why one lineage ultimately remains while every other disappears. To understand that mystery, the search must widen beyond biology, into the unpredictable interplay of chance, innovation, cooperation, and timing that shapes the destiny of every species. If the story ended with genetics alone, the mystery would already seem remarkable. Ancient relatives live on in fragments of DNA, extinct populations continue influencing modern biology, and the family tree proves far more intertwined than anyone once imagined. Yet the central question still remains unanswered. Why does one human lineage survive while every other gradually disappears? The deeper researchers investigate, the more they discover that no single explanation is sufficient. The survival of Homo sapiens is not the result of one decisive advantage, but of many forces acting together over immense spans of time. One of the earliest ideas proposes that modern humans simply possess larger or more capable brains than their relatives. At first glance, this seems plausible. Humans produce cave paintings, elaborate tools, musical instruments, and eventually agriculture and civilization. Surely such achievements must reflect a uniquely superior mind. The evidence tells a more complicated story. Neanderthal brains are on average at least as large as those of modern humans, and in some cases slightly larger. Brain size alone clearly cannot explain the outcome. Modern neuroscience also demonstrates that intelligence depends not simply on volume, but on the organization of neural networks, patterns of development, and countless subtle interactions that fossil skulls cannot preserve. Unfortunately, brains do not fossilize. Scientists can estimate their approximate shape from the interior of fossil skulls, but thoughts, memories, language, imagination, and planning disappear forever when soft tissue decays. The archaeological record therefore reveals behavior rather than consciousness. Behavior suggests that Neanderthals are anything but unintelligent. They master difficult hunting techniques. They manufacture sophisticated tools. They care for injured companions. They adapt to severe Ice Age climates. They survive across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Any explanation portraying them as simple or incapable is no longer supported by mainstream evidence. Instead, researchers increasingly focus on differences that may seem less dramatic, but become powerful over long periods. Population size is one of them. A larger population creates more opportunities for innovation. Every individual observes the environment differently, experiments with different techniques, and solves different problems. Most new ideas disappear quickly, but occasionally one proves extraordinarily useful. In a population of 100,000 individuals, the chances of producing valuable innovations are far greater than in a population of only 10,000. Innovation alone is not enough. It must also spread. Here, social networks become critically important. If an improved hunting technique remains confined to one isolated valley, its impact is limited. If neighboring communities adopt it, then pass it onward through generations, the entire species benefits. Cultural evolution begins operating almost like biological evolution, except it moves far faster. Useful ideas reproduce by being taught rather than inherited genetically. Archaeologists see hints of this process in the growing standardization of certain technologies across large regions. Stone blade techniques appear over broad geographic areas. Decorative traditions spread. Bone and antler tools become increasingly sophisticated. None of these developments occurs simultaneously everywhere, but together they suggest expanding communication among distant communities. Another possibility concerns childhood. Modern humans experience an unusually long period of development compared with many other mammals. Children remain dependent upon adults for years while learning enormous quantities of information. This extended learning period may appear inefficient, but it allows the accumulation of remarkably complex cultural knowledge. Young individuals do not merely learn how to survive, they inherit thousands of observations gathered across countless generations, where fish spawn during different seasons, which plants become poisonous after drought, how to recognize weather patterns, how to repair tools, how to negotiate relationships with neighboring communities. Culture becomes an expanding library carried entirely within living minds. Some anthropologists argue that Homo sapiens become especially effective at cooperative learning. Adults invest extraordinary effort in teaching children, while children display exceptional curiosity and imitation. These traits strengthen cumulative culture, allowing each generation to begin where the previous one leaves off, rather than rediscovering survival strategies from the beginning. Language almost certainly plays a central role. Although no recording of prehistoric speech survives the complexity of expanding technologies, strongly implies increasingly sophisticated communication. precise instructions become essential for manufacturing composite tools, preparing adhesives, stitching tailored clothing, and organizing cooperative hunts involving many participants. Language also transforms planning. A community capable of discussing future possibilities can prepare before disaster strikes. Food can be stored. Travel routes can be organized. Seasonal migrations can be anticipated. Collective decisions become increasingly effective. Scholars remain cautious because direct evidence for ancient language is impossible to recover. Nevertheless, the cumulative complexity visible in archaeological sites strongly suggests communication systems capable of transmitting highly detailed information. Another factor may involve dietary flexibility. Homo sapiens exploit an extraordinary range of food sources across different environments. Coastal shellfish, freshwater fish, large herbivores, small mammals, birds, seeds, tubers, nuts, fruits, marine resources. Such diversity reduces dependence upon any single ecological niche. If climate change affects one resource, others remain available. This flexibility becomes especially valuable during periods of rapid environmental instability. Neanderthals also consume varied diets in many regions, and recent evidence continues expanding appreciation for their adaptability. However, some researchers suggest that Homo sapiens maintain broader dietary strategies over larger geographic scales. The exact degree of difference remains debated, but even modest advantages accumulate over thousands of years. Mobility provides another possible explanation. Modern human populations appear increasingly willing to travel remarkable distances. Stone materials move hundreds of kilometers. Marine shells reach inland settlements. Colonization spreads rapidly into Australia, northern Eurasia, and eventually the Americas. These movements demonstrate not merely physical endurance but organizational capacity. Exploration requires confidence planning and cooperation. Families must transport children, tools, food, and knowledge into unfamiliar landscapes, while maintaining connections with communities left behind. Demography continues influencing every aspect of survival. Larger populations possess greater resilience against local disasters. If one valley experiences famine, neighboring groups may remain unaffected. If disease strikes one community, others preserve cultural traditions and genetic diversity. Small isolated populations enjoy no such protection. Random events become disproportionately powerful. This concept is familiar to conservation biologists studying endangered species today. When numbers become sufficiently low, extinction may occur even without major environmental catastrophe. A few unlucky years can be enough. The same principle almost certainly affects prehistoric humans. Disease remains another intriguing possibility. Direct evidence for ancient epidemics is frustratingly limited because microorganisms rarely fossilize. Yet whenever previously separated populations meet pathogens travel alongside them. History repeatedly demonstrates this pattern. Agricultural societies later devastate isolated populations through diseases to which they possess partial immunity. Whether similar processes contribute significantly to Neanderthal decline remains uncertain. Some researchers consider it plausible. Others argue that available evidence remains insufficient. The debate continues because the archaeological record cannot preserve every biological interaction. Perhaps the most difficult factor to measure is timing. Homo sapiens expand into Eurasia during periods when climates fluctuate dramatically. Neanderthals are already adapting to repeated environmental changes while facing fragmented populations. Even relatively small additional pressures may therefore produce larger consequences than they would under more stable conditions. Evolution often depends upon arriving at the right place during the right moment. The difference between flourishing and disappearing may rest not on superiority but on circumstance. This realization changes the emotional tone of the story. The surviving species is not necessarily the strongest in every respect, nor is every extinct species inherently weaker. History instead reflects an intricate interaction between biology, culture, environment, and chance. Every advantage strengthens resilience. Every disadvantage increases vulnerability. Every unexpected drought, volcanic eruption, migration, or successful alliance nudges populations toward different futures. When viewed over tens of thousands of years, these countless small influences gradually separate the one lineage that survives from the many that do not. No single explanation fully accounts for the outcome. Instead, survival emerges from an extraordinary convergence of favorable traits, effective cooperation, environmental flexibility, expanding knowledge, and fortunate timing. Even then, the margin between existence and extinction may have been far narrower than anyone living today would comfortably imagine. There is an uncomfortable possibility running quietly beneath every scientific explanation. After accounting for intelligence cooperation, technology, climate migration genetics, and population size, another force still remains. It is a force that leaves almost no trace in the archaeological record, cannot be measured directly in fossil bones, and rarely receives the attention given to more visible causes. That force is chance. Evolution is often described as though it follows an orderly set of rules. Natural selection favors traits that improve survival. Better adaptations spread through populations. Less successful lineages gradually disappear. This framework is fundamentally correct, yet it can create the misleading impression that every outcome is inevitable. The history of life suggests otherwise. Again and again, survival depends upon circumstances that no species can predict or control. A volcanic eruption changes regional climates. A river unexpectedly alters its course. A prolonged drought divides one population into two. A disease reaches one valley but never crosses a mountain range. A storm destroys a seasonal camp while sparing another only a few kilometers away. Each event appears local. Over thousands of years, their cumulative effects become enormous. Modern conservation biology offers a useful comparison. Small populations of endangered animals often disappear despite possessing perfectly adequate adaptations for their environments. The problem is not that they suddenly become poorly designed by evolution. Rather, they become increasingly vulnerable to random events. A wildfire destroys one breeding area. Several consecutive years produce poor food supplies. Too few young survive. Genetic diversity declines. Recovery becomes progressively more difficult. Eventually, extinction occurs through the interaction of many modest setbacks rather than one overwhelming catastrophe. The same principle almost certainly affects ancient human populations. Many Neanderthal communities appear relatively small and geographically scattered during the later stages of their history. Denisovan populations may also be dispersed across immense regions separated by formidable natural barriers. Every isolated community faces demographic risks that larger interconnected populations can better withstand. Imagine two neighboring valleys. Each supports approximately 100 individuals. One experiences a severe winter during which several experienced hunters die. The following spring brings poor animal migrations. The next year, disease spreads among children. None of these events alone guarantees collapse. Together, however, they may reduce the community below the point where long-term recovery becomes possible. Now imagine the same sequence affecting a much larger regional network connected through marriage, trade, and migration. Families relocate. Knowledge survives elsewhere. Population losses are distributed across many communities. The crisis remains serious, but extinction becomes far less likely. Resilience is therefore not merely an individual quality. It belongs to systems. One of the greatest strengths of Homo sapiens may lie in building social systems capable of absorbing shocks that would overwhelm smaller, more isolated populations. Timing also exerts extraordinary influence. Consider the arrival of modern humans into Europe. If Homo sapiens had reached the continent 100,000 years earlier, environmental conditions would have been different. Neanderthal populations might have been larger, habitats more stable, competition less intense. The outcome could have changed dramatically. Likewise, had severe climatic fluctuations occurred several thousand years later, expanding Homo sapiens populations might themselves have faced greater difficulties. History unfolds only once. Scientists can reconstruct evidence preserved in rocks, bones, and genes, but alternative histories remain forever unknowable. This realization encourages caution. Researchers increasingly avoid explanations claiming that any single factor inevitably determines human survival. Instead, they recognize that multiple favorable conditions converge at particular moments. Technology expands, social networks strengthen, population numbers increase, climate shifts, competitors weaken, opportunities emerge. None alone explains the final result. Together, they reshape the future. Another fascinating aspect concerns geographic luck. Africa, the homeland of Homo sapiens, possesses extraordinary ecological diversity. Dense tropical forests, open savannas, mountain highlands, great river systems, coastal environments rich in marine resources, deserts that periodically become greener during wetter climatic phases. Populations living across such varied environments encounter an exceptional range of adaptive challenges. Over immense spans of time, this diversity may foster remarkable behavioral flexibility. Groups accustomed to responding to changing conditions carry that experience when expanding into Eurasia. The precise importance of this ecological background remains debated, but many anthropologists regard Africa's environmental variability as an important context for understanding later human adaptability. Migration itself often rewards fortunate geography. Some expanding populations encounter relatively favorable corridors linking continents. During periods of lower sea level, broad coastal plains emerge. Land bridges connect previously isolated regions. River valleys provide natural travel routes. These opportunities are temporary. Communities reaching them at the appropriate moment gain access to entirely new territories. Those arriving too early or too late may find the same routes blocked by water glaciers or inhospitable climates. Even reproduction contains an element of chance. Every child inherits a unique combination of genetic material. Some combinations prove especially advantageous under particular environmental conditions. Others do not. Across millions of births over thousands of generations, natural selection gradually alters populations. Yet each individual outcome remains unpredictable. Ancient DNA reveals that many inherited Neanderthal and Denisovan genes survive because they provide advantages in certain environments. Other inherited genes disappear because circumstances no longer favor them. Evolution continuously edits the genetic record. Perhaps the greatest irony is that Homo sapiens itself repeatedly approaches dangerous bottlenecks. Genetic evidence indicates that our own species experiences periods during which breeding populations become surprisingly small. Researchers continue debating exact numbers and dates, but broad agreement exists that humanity is never immune to demographic danger. There are moments when extinction becomes a realistic possibility. If circumstances had shifted only slightly, modern civilization might never have existed. The archaeological record preserves occasional glimpses of these fragile periods. Certain regions appear abandoned for centuries. Others support only sparse populations. Entire cultural traditions disappear before new ones emerge. Sometimes the reason is known. Often it remains mysterious. Climate explains part of the pattern. Volcanic activity explains another. Migration contributes elsewhere. Still significant gaps remain. History rarely provides complete answers. This uncertainty is not a weakness of science. It is an honest reflection of incomplete evidence. Every year brings new discoveries, a fossil unearthed from an overlooked cave, ancient DNA recovered from sediments once thought unusable, improved dating techniques correcting previous timelines, unexpected archaeological sites emerging from melting glaciers or eroding coastlines. Each finding refines humanity's story. Sometimes it overturns assumptions held for decades. The search therefore continues. One of the most important lessons emerging from modern paleoanthropology is humility. Earlier generations often believed they had solved the major questions of human evolution. Again and again, new evidence proved otherwise. Entire human species such as the Denisovans remained unknown until remarkably recently. Homo floresiensis surprised the scientific world. Homo luzonensis expanded the family tree even further. Who can confidently say the final discoveries have already been made? Some researchers suspect additional unknown populations once inhabit regions where fossils preserve poorly. Genetic signals hint at ancient lineages not yet identified from skeletal remains. Africa in particular almost certainly preserves evolutionary histories still waiting to be uncovered beneath landscapes that have received relatively little excavation compared with parts of Europe. The surviving species often views its past through the comforting lens of inevitability. It is tempting to believe that civilization, science, and modern humanity are destined outcomes from the beginning. The evidence encourages a different perspective. The road is narrow. The margins are small. Fortune repeatedly favors one lineage without guaranteeing its future. Homo sapiens survives not because extinction is impossible, but because across countless generations enough favorable circumstances align at just the right moments. That realization carries profound implications. The disappearance of every other human species is not merely an ancient mystery. It is also a reminder that survival itself is one of the rarest achievements in the history of life. When the last Neanderthal communities disappear, the world does not suddenly become safer. Predators still stalk the grasslands. Winters remain bitter. Droughts continue returning without warning. Volcanoes erupt, rivers flood, and coastlines shift as glaciers slowly retreat. The difference is not that danger has ended. The difference is that only one human species now faces it. For the first time in millions of years, Homo sapiens no longer shares the planet with other human relatives. This transformation is so gradual that no one living through it could have recognized its significance. A child born in one valley never meets a Neanderthal because none remain nearby. Another grows to adulthood without hearing stories of Denisovans, because those distant populations have already faded from memory. Within only a few thousand years, entire human species pass beyond living experience. Eventually, they pass beyond legend as well. The surviving communities continue expanding. Freed from competition with closely related human species, Homo sapiens occupies landscapes that had once been shared. Hunting territories broaden. Seasonal migration routes stretch farther across Eurasia. Populations slowly increase, though not evenly. Some regions flourish, while others remain sparsely inhabited for thousands of years. This expansion is not driven by conquest alone. Many newly occupied landscapes are simply empty. Glaciers retreat northward, exposing fresh valleys and plains that had been buried beneath ice for tens of thousands of years. Plants arrive first. Mosses and grasses establish fragile footholds. Shrubs follow. Forests gradually reclaim the land. Grazing animals expand into these recovering ecosystems, and human hunters soon follow. Nature is rebuilding itself after the Ice Age. Humanity expands alongside it. The close of the last glacial period, beginning roughly 20,000 years ago, and accelerating after about 15,000 years ago, transforms the planet at an extraordinary pace. Vast ice sheets melt, releasing enormous quantities of fresh water into the oceans. Global sea levels rise by more than 100 meters over several millennia. The consequences are immense. Entire coastlines disappear. River valleys flood. Low-lying plains vanish beneath advancing seas. Some of the richest hunting grounds known to prehistoric people are permanently submerged. Modern archaeologists estimate that countless ancient settlements now lie beneath coastal waters around the world. Because prehistoric communities often prefer rivers, estuaries, and shorelines rich in food, much of humanity's earliest history is hidden beneath the sea. The disappearance of these landscapes changes migration itself. Doggerland, the broad plain once connecting Britain to mainland Europe, gradually drowns beneath the rising North Sea. Families who had travelled across open grasslands for generations eventually witness marshes, expanding rivers, widening, and salt water creeping inland year after year. The flooding does not happen overnight. It unfolds over many human lifetimes. Each generation adjusts slightly. Camps move to higher ground. Old pathways become shallow bays. Familiar hunting territories slowly vanish beneath the waves. The memory of these lost landscapes may survive for centuries through oral tradition before disappearing completely. Similar transformations occur elsewhere. The land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska becomes submerged, separating populations that had once travelled freely between Asia and North America. Coastal plains around Southeast Asia disappear beneath rising seas, creating the islands recognised today. Communities that once lived within connected landscapes suddenly find themselves isolated by expanding oceans. These geographic changes reshape human diversity. Groups separated by water begin following independent cultural histories. Languages evolve differently. Technologies diverge. Local traditions adapt to unique environments. Even though Homo sapiens is now the only surviving human species, diversity within that single species continues increasing. Different populations develop remarkable regional expertise. Arctic communities master survival in frozen environments where temperatures remain deadly for much of the year. Desert populations learn to navigate landscapes where water is scarce, and survival depends upon intimate ecological knowledge. Coastal societies exploit marine resources with increasing sophistication. Forest communities understand seasonal cycles hidden beneath dense canopies. The remarkable flexibility once helping Homo sapiens survive alongside other human species now allows adaptation to almost every major environment on Earth. By approximately 65,000 years ago, modern humans have already reached Australia through a series of sea crossings, requiring planning cooperation and watercraft capable of transporting families. Later populations spread into the high latitudes of Siberia. Eventually, people move into the Americas, although the precise timing and routes remain active areas of research. Some travel through interior corridors exposed by retreating ice sheets. Others may follow productive Pacific coastlines. The evidence continues evolving as new archaeological discoveries emerge. What remains clear is the extraordinary speed of expansion. Within a relatively short span of evolutionary time, Homo sapiens occupies nearly every habitable continent. This success reflects more than physical endurance. It demonstrates remarkable cultural adaptability. Communities entering unfamiliar landscapes do not rely solely on inherited instincts. They observe, experiment, share information, modify tools, develop new clothing, discover local food sources, adjust their behavior faster than biological evolution alone could accomplish. Culture increasingly becomes humanity's primary survival strategy. Fire remains central. So does cooperation. Knowledge continues accumulating. One innovation encourages another. Fishing technologies improve. Projectile weapons become more effective. Storage methods become increasingly sophisticated. Seasonal camps gradually develop into longer occupations in especially productive environments. Population density slowly rises in favorable regions. These demographic changes begin altering ecosystems themselves. Human hunters influence animal populations. Controlled burning reshapes vegetation in some landscapes. Large mammals disappear from various continents for reasons that remain actively debated. Climate change clearly contributes while expanding human hunting pressure likely plays an important role in many regions. The relative importance of each factor differs across continents, and scholars continue examining the evidence carefully. Whatever the exact causes, Homo sapiens is no longer simply adapting to nature. Increasingly, humanity begins altering it. This marks a profound turning point. For millions of years, different human species respond primarily to environmental change. Now the surviving species starts becoming an environmental force in its own right. The transformation remains gradual. No one recognizes it immediately, yet its long-term consequences will eventually surpass anything experienced by earlier human relatives. Looking back across deep time, another realization quietly emerges. The disappearance of Neanderthals Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, Homo erectus, and other ancient relatives leaves Homo sapiens carrying an unprecedented responsibility. Every future human achievement will belong to a single surviving branch of a once much larger family. Every language, every civilization, every work of art, every scientific discovery, every mistake, every triumph, they all descend from one lineage that survives while the others fade into silence. The world has become a planet inhabited by only one kind of human. The consequences of that extraordinary loneliness are only beginning to unfold. The echoes of vanished human species are easy to overlook because they are woven into ordinary life. They are not announced by monuments or preserved in written histories. Instead, they appear in the quiet details of biology, in subtle variations that help people respond to different environments, and in discoveries emerging from laboratories that did not exist even a few generations ago. Every new genetic study adds another piece to a story that once seemed permanently lost. For thousands of years, no one suspects that extinct human relatives continue influencing the present. Farmers cultivate fields where Neanderthals once hunt reindeer. Cities rise above valleys crossed by Denisovan populations whose names are never recorded. Children grow up believing humanity has always been alone. Science gradually reveals otherwise. One of the most striking lessons from ancient DNA is that evolution rarely erases the past completely. Instead, it layers new adaptations upon older foundations. Modern humans inherit overwhelmingly Homo sapiens genomes, yet embedded within them are fragments refined by entirely different populations facing entirely different challenges. Some inherited variants improve immune responses, others influence how skin reacts to sunlight or cold. Certain genes affect the body's regulation of fat storage, helping ancient populations survive harsh winters or unpredictable food supplies. Many of these effects are subtle, and scientists continue debating exactly how individual genetic variants influence modern health. The evidence remains incomplete, but one conclusion is increasingly clear. The biological legacy of extinct humans is not merely symbolic. It continues functioning inside living populations. The immune system provides perhaps the clearest example. When Homo sapiens expands into Eurasia, it encounters not only unfamiliar climates but also unfamiliar microorganisms. Neanderthals have already lived in these environments for hundreds of thousands of years. During that immense span of time, natural selection favors genetic variants, helping them respond to local pathogens. When interbreeding occurs, some of those advantageous immune-related genes pass into Homo sapiens. For expanding modern human populations, such inherited defenses may offer important benefits in landscapes filled with unfamiliar diseases. Evolution therefore acts less like a battle producing a single winner, and more like a process of borrowing useful solutions wherever they arise. The same principle appears in high-altitude adaptation. The Denisovan-derived EPAS1 gene found among many Tibetan populations is one of the strongest documented examples of adaptive introgression, the transfer of beneficial genes from one species into another through interbreeding. Without Denisovan ancestry, the remarkable physiological efficiency displayed by many high-altitude populations today might have evolved very differently, or perhaps much more slowly. Such discoveries transform extinct humans from evolutionary failures into contributors. Their disappearance does not erase the value of the adaptations they develop. Those adaptations continue serving humanity long after their original populations vanish. Ancient DNA has also begun uncovering relationships among African populations, that are every bit as fascinating as those found in Eurasia. Because warm climates make DNA preservation far more difficult, Africa long remains underrepresented in genetic studies of deep prehistory. As laboratory techniques improve, researchers increasingly identify evidence suggesting that the evolution of Homo sapiens within Africa is itself extraordinarily complex. Rather than emerging from one isolated population alone, modern humans likely develop through repeated interaction among numerous groups spread across different regions of the continent. These populations separate during periods of environmental change. Later they reconnect. Genes flow between them. Innovations spread. Differences accumulate, then partially disappear through renewed contact. This dynamic process produces remarkable diversity even before Homo sapiens expands into the rest of the world. Scholars continue refining this picture as new discoveries emerge, but it reinforces an important lesson already visible throughout the human story. Isolation creates diversity. Connection preserves survival. The archaeological record increasingly supports this interpretation. Sites across Africa reveal regional variation in tool traditions, symbolic behavior, and resource use, extending back hundreds of thousands of years. Different communities solve similar problems in different ways. Some rely heavily on coastal foods. Others specialize in river systems, grasslands, forests, or upland environments. No single pathway defines early Homo sapiens. Flexibility itself becomes the defining characteristic. The legacy of extinct relatives also extends into the study of medicine. Researchers investigating genetic influences on disease sometimes discover that inherited Neanderthal variants increase the likelihood of particular modern illnesses under certain conditions: inflammatory disorders, autoimmune diseases, responses to viral infections, sensitivity to environmental factors. The relationships are often subtle rather than deterministic, and scientists are careful not to overstate individual genetic effects. Still, these findings illustrate an important principle. Genes selected for Ice Age survival do not necessarily produce ideal outcomes in 21st century environments. An immune system optimized to confront ancient pathogens may react differently when surrounded by modern diets, sanitation pollution, and dramatically longer life expectancy. Evolution never plans ahead. It solves immediate problems. As environments change, yesterday's adaptation may become today's disadvantage. The opposite also occurs. Traits carrying little value in one environment may suddenly become useful in another. Natural selection remains an ongoing process. Human evolution does not end with the disappearance of other human species. It continues quietly in every generation. Meanwhile, archaeology itself is undergoing a revolution. Techniques unimaginable only a few decades ago now reveal astonishing details about prehistoric life. Microscopic wear patterns on stone tools identify how they are used. Chemical analysis reconstructs ancient diets. Isotopes preserved in teeth reveal where individuals spend their childhoods. Proteins surviving when DNA has disappeared still provide clues about evolutionary relationships. Ground-penetrating radar identifies buried settlements without excavation. Three-dimensional scanning allows fragile fossils to be studied in extraordinary detail without damaging them. Artificial intelligence increasingly assists researchers by identifying subtle patterns across enormous archaeological datasets. Each technological advance uncovers another layer of humanity's forgotten past. Yet every answer generates new questions. How many human populations remain undiscovered beneath tropical forests or submerged coastlines? How many species leave no recognizable fossils but survive briefly in isolated regions? Did additional episodes of interbreeding occur with populations that science has not yet identified? Some genetic studies hint at the existence of so-called ghost populations, ancient human groups inferred from unusual genetic patterns, despite leaving no confirmed skeletal remains. These possibilities remain under investigation and scholars approach them cautiously. Still, they remind us that the family tree remains incomplete. Human history continues expanding rather than shrinking. The more researchers learn, the less simple the story becomes. The old image of one primitive ancestor gradually evolving into one modern species has been replaced by a crowded landscape of overlapping populations, repeated migrations, cultural exchanges, genetic mixing, environmental crises, and remarkable resilience. The sole surviving human species therefore carries far more history than its appearance alone suggests. Every person alive is the endpoint of countless successful survival decisions made across hundreds of thousands of years. Every genome contains echoes of journeys across deserts, forests, mountains, glaciers, and coastlines. Every community inherits knowledge built upon discoveries made by ancestors whose names will never be known. The disappearance of humanity's relatives is not merely a story about extinction, it is also a story about inheritance. The past survives not only through bones preserved in caves, but through living people whose bodies continue carrying pieces of a much larger human family. That inheritance brings with it one final and perhaps most profound lesson. Survival should never be mistaken for permanence. History has already shown how many human lineages once seemed secure before quietly fading away. There is no guarantee that the last surviving branch is exempt from the same laws of change that shape every species before it. Standing in a modern city surrounded by glass towers, satellites orbiting overhead, and machines capable of reading the genetic code of extinct humans, it is easy to believe that the struggle for survival belongs entirely to the distant past. Humanity appears to have escaped the uncertainties that shaped its ancestors. Food can be transported across continents. Medicines cure diseases that once killed entire communities. Information travels around the world in moments. Compared with the fragile camps of the Ice Age, modern civilization seems almost invulnerable. Yet the deeper history of humanity suggests a different perspective. Every human species that disappears is successful before it vanishes. Homo erectus survives for well over 1 million years. Neanderthals endure repeated ice ages across western Eurasia. Denisovans adapt to environments stretching from Siberia to high mountain plateaus, and perhaps into tropical Southeast Asia. Homo floresiensis thrives on floras for tens of thousands of years. None of these populations is failing in any obvious sense before their final decline begins. Success and permanence are not the same thing. This lesson echoes throughout the history of life. Entire groups of animals dominate ecosystems for millions of years before environmental changes reshape the world around them. Giant reptiles disappear. Ice Age mammals decline. Coral reefs expand and contract. Forests replace grasslands before retreating once more. Every ecosystem is temporary when measured against geological time. Humanity is not exempt from that pattern. What distinguishes Homo sapiens is not immunity to change, but an extraordinary ability to respond to it. Adaptation remains our defining characteristic. Long before agriculture, our ancestors adjust to deserts, forests, coastlines, mountains, frozen tundra, and tropical islands. They do not wait for biology alone to solve problems. They reshape behavior, technology, and social organization far more rapidly than genes can evolve. This flexibility becomes civilization's foundation. Farming emerges independently in several regions after the end of the last ice age. Permanent settlements grow larger. Writing appears. Trade networks span continents. Scientific knowledge accumulates. Industrial technology transforms the planet. Each achievement builds upon the same capacity for collective learning that first allows small bands of hunter-gatherers to survive changing climates hundreds of thousands of years earlier. The scale changes. The principle does not. Knowledge remains humanity's greatest survival tool. Yet knowledge alone cannot eliminate uncertainty. Modern civilization faces environmental challenges that differ from those confronting Neanderthals or Denisovans, but they share an important characteristic. They require cooperation extending far beyond individual communities. Climate systems remain interconnected. Disease continues crossing borders. Water resources fluctuate. Ecosystems respond to changing temperatures. The surviving species has become so numerous and technologically powerful that it now influences the very environmental systems to which it once merely adapted. This transformation is unprecedented. Earlier human species respond primarily to nature. Modern humanity increasingly alters nature itself. Forests are cleared. Rivers are redirected. Species disappear. Atmospheric chemistry changes. Entire landscapes are transformed within decades rather than millennia. From the perspective of deep time, this shift has occurred with astonishing speed. If the entire history of Homo sapiens were compressed into a single day, agriculture would appear only during the final few minutes. Industrial civilization would occupy only the last few seconds. Everything familiar to modern life exists within the briefest instant of our evolutionary journey. This perspective encourages humility. Our ancestors survived because they continuously adapt to changing conditions. Whenever populations become rigid, isolated, or unable to respond to environmental pressures, vulnerability increases. That lesson applies across millions of years of evolution. It applies equally to societies. History repeatedly shows civilizations flourishing for centuries before drought, political instability, ecological stress disease, or combinations of these factors undermine their resilience. No civilization collapses for exactly the same reason. No human species disappears for exactly the same reason either. Complex systems rarely fail because of one cause alone. Instead, multiple pressures accumulate until recovery becomes increasingly difficult. This realization helps explain why researchers resist overly simple answers to the disappearance of Neanderthals or other extinct relatives. Was climate responsible? Partly. Did competition matter? Almost certainly. Did population size influence resilience? Very likely. Did interbreeding change demographic patterns? Yes. Did chance shape the final outcome? Almost certainly. Each explanation contributes part of the answer. Together they reveal that survival emerges through interaction rather than isolation. The same principle defines modern humanity. Our greatest strengths rarely exist independently. Technology supports agriculture. Agriculture supports population growth. Communication strengthens cooperation. Science improves medicine. Education preserves knowledge. Every achievement depends upon countless others. The archaeological record quietly reinforces this truth. No individual invents civilization. It emerges through the accumulated efforts of millions of people across thousands of generations. Likewise, no single ancestor ensures humanity's survival. Every surviving child, every successful migration, every shared innovation, every alliance, every lesson remembered during a difficult winter contributes to the continuation of the species. The overwhelming majority of those individuals leave no identifiable trace. Their names are unknown. Their faces are lost. Yet without them, the chain of survival breaks. This perspective transforms the meaning of fossils: a fragment of jaw preserved in limestone, a worn stone blade abandoned beside a river, charcoal scattered across an ancient hearth, a child's footprint hardened in volcanic ash. Each discovery represents more than an isolated artifact. It is evidence that someone succeeds in surviving long enough to leave descendants knowledge or influence extending beyond a single lifetime. Many do not. The archaeological record is therefore both a record of endurance and of disappearance. Perhaps the greatest misconception about evolution is that it rewards perfection. Perfection does not exist. Every species remains a temporary solution to current environmental conditions. When those conditions change, adaptation must continue. Homo sapiens survives because adaptation never truly stops. Even today, human populations continue evolving biologically, culturally, and technologically. The process has not ended. It has simply taken new forms. Looking across the immense span of prehistoric time, another thought quietly emerges. If modern researchers had lived 100,000 years ago, they would likely never predict that Homo sapiens alone would become the sole surviving human species. The outcome would appear uncertain. Several human species are thriving simultaneously. Each possesses impressive abilities. Each has survived enormous environmental challenges. Nothing obviously marks one lineage as destined to inherit the future. That uncertainty is perhaps the most important lesson of all. History is not written in advance. It unfolds through countless decisions, fortunate circumstances, unexpected disasters, and gradual adaptations accumulating across time. Humanity survives not because the ending is guaranteed, but because generation after generation continues finding ways to endure. Only one final step remains in this extraordinary story. It is not about extinction. It is not about genetics. It's about perspective itself, about what it truly means to be the last surviving member of a once crowded human family, stretching back millions of years. The last survivor rarely realizes that it has become the last. When the final Neanderthal child is born, no one marks the occasion. When the last Denisovan community lights its evening fire, there is no witness capable of recording that an entire branch of humanity is approaching its final chapter. The earth continues turning. Herds continue migrating. Rivers continue flowing toward distant seas. To those living through these moments, life feels ordinary. Only from the immense distance of deep time does the true significance become visible. That perspective changes everything. For most of the human story, our species is never alone. Across Africa, Europe and Asia, several kinds of humans walk beneath the same sky. They adapt to different climates, develop different traditions, and solve similar problems in remarkably different ways. Some endure frozen tundra. Others master tropical islands. Some survive for more than 1 million years, far longer than Homo sapiens has existed so far. Their disappearance is therefore not evidence of failure. It is evidence of how difficult survival truly is. Looking back through the archaeological record, a remarkable pattern emerges. Every surviving population balances countless competing pressures. Climate shifts without warning, landscapes transform, food sources appear and disappear. Small communities become isolated. Children must inherit enough knowledge to navigate environments that never remain stable for long. Success depends not upon one extraordinary ability, but upon the continual interaction of intelligence, cooperation, adaptability, memory, and circumstance. And no single explanation solves the mystery. That conclusion may seem less satisfying than discovering one decisive cause, yet it reflects the reality preserved in the evidence. Scholars continue debating the relative importance of climate technology, population size, cultural exchange, genetics, disease, and chance because each contributes something meaningful. Remove any one of these elements, and the story becomes incomplete. The surviving human lineage is therefore not simply the strongest. It is the lineage that repeatedly proves resilient across changing conditions. Resilience differs from strength. Strength may dominate a particular environment. Resilience allows survival when that environment changes. This distinction echoes throughout nature. A species perfectly adapted to one ecosystem may struggle when the climate shifts or new competitors arrive. Another species less specialized but more flexible gradually expands into opportunities created by change. Homo sapiens appears to embody that flexibility. Our ancestors repeatedly enter unfamiliar landscapes and learn how to survive within them. They cross deserts that once seemed impassable. They settle frozen regions beneath the edge of continental glaciers. They navigate coastlines, forests, river valleys, mountains, and islands. Every successful migration adds another layer of collective knowledge that future generations inherit. Knowledge itself becomes humanity's greatest adaptation. Unlike claws-thick fur or massive teeth, knowledge can grow continuously. Every generation begins where the previous one ends. Every discovery becomes available to countless descendants. Fire is refined. Tools improve. Clothing becomes warmer. Social networks expand. Language grows more expressive. Culture accumulates faster than biology alone could ever respond. This ability fundamentally changes the relationship between humans and evolution. Biological evolution continues, but cultural evolution increasingly becomes the dominant force shaping survival. That shift carries profound consequences. It allows one species to occupy environments that would otherwise require entirely different bodies. Rather than evolving thick fur, humans create clothing. Rather than evolving stronger claws, they manufacture tools. Rather than evolving sharper senses alone, they exchange information. The body remains important. The shared mind becomes even more powerful. Yet the story should not encourage complacency. The same evidence revealing humanity's extraordinary adaptability also reveals remarkable fragility. Genetic studies indicate that our ancestors passed through dangerous population bottlenecks. Archaeological sites show abandoned landscapes. Entire traditions disappear. Communities rise and fall. Again and again, survival hangs upon margins far narrower than modern observers often imagine. Even today, traces of that vulnerability remain. Every person alive depends upon knowledge inherited from countless generations. Every society depends upon cooperation extending far beyond individual families. Every civilization remains connected to environmental systems that ultimately sustain it. The deep past reminds us that no species exists apart from the world it inhabits. Perhaps that is why the disappearance of humanity's relatives continues holding such fascination. It is not merely an ancient puzzle. It is a mirror. The Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, Homo erectus, and other extinct relatives demonstrate both the extraordinary possibilities and the profound uncertainties of evolution. Each succeeds for immense spans of time. Each adapts brilliantly to particular worlds. Each ultimately encounters circumstances from which recovery does not occur. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens continues, not because destiny chooses one lineage, not because perfection guarantees success, but because enough favorable traits, fortunate moments, successful adaptations, and resilient communities repeatedly align across hundreds of thousands of years. That alignment produces every person alive today. It produces every language ever spoken, every city, every scientific discovery, every work of art, every story, every memory. The surviving species carries within it the accumulated history of an entire human family that is far larger than anyone once imagined. Modern science has only recently begun uncovering that forgotten family. New fossils continue emerging. Ancient DNA continues revealing unexpected relationships. Improved dating techniques keep refining old timelines. Future discoveries will almost certainly reshape parts of this story once again. That uncertainty is not disappointing. It is exciting. It means the human past remains alive with unanswered questions waiting beneath caves, deserts, forests, and submerged coastlines across the world. Perhaps somewhere beneath layers of ancient sediment rests another fragment of bone belonging to a population that no one yet knows existed. Perhaps another cave preserves genetic traces capable of redrawing the family tree once more. The search continues because humanity's story is still being discovered. For now, however, one conclusion stands above all the others. The greatest mystery is not that so many human species disappeared. The greatest mystery is that against overwhelming odds, one lineage survived long enough to ask why. Word count 1090. Final wind down. The ancient campfires have long since faded into cold ash. The footprints pressed into soft riverbanks have been washed away by countless seasons. Forests have grown where glaciers once stood, and seas now cover valleys where families once gathered beneath open skies. Time has hidden almost everything, yet it has not hidden enough. A fragment of bone, a chipped stone blade, a handful of ancient genes carried quietly through living people. These are enough to remind us that humanity was never meant to be a solitary story. For millions of years, the Earth belonged to a remarkable family of human beings, each finding its own way through changing climates, uncertain landscapes, and the endless challenge of survival. Only one branch remains. That fact can inspire pride, but it also invites humility. The people who came before us were not simply stepping stones leading toward the present. They were complete human worlds in their own right, shaped by hopes, fears, relationships, and daily struggles that rarely survive in the archaeological record. Their lives mattered to them just as deeply as ours matter to us today. Across the immense sweep of time, survival proves to be a fragile achievement rather than a permanent condition. Every generation inherits a world it did not create, and leaves behind a world it cannot fully control. The same adaptability that once carried small groups across glaciers and deserts continues to define humanity, even if the challenges now take different forms. The silence left by our vanished relatives is therefore not empty. It is filled with lessons about resilience, cooperation, curiosity, and the importance of remaining flexible in a changing world. Their story has not ended completely because pieces of it still live within us in our biology, in our capacity to learn, and in our determination to understand where we came from. As the last light fades over the ancient landscapes of prehistory, the mystery remains quietly unresolved in the best possible way. Every new discovery has the potential to change what we think we know. Somewhere beneath stone, sand, ice, or sea, another forgotten chapter may still be waiting. Until then, the surviving branch of the human family continues carrying the memories of all the others walking forward through time beneath the same sky that once watched them all.